Hello and welcome back to the Pixie Cast. Thank you so much for joining me today. This is going to be kind of like a quick-ish episode. I usually make this long-winded post for St. Patrick's Day regarding all the memes about the historical St. Patrick versus the native Irish pagans, but I figured since I now have this little platform, I could do a bit more of an in-depth look. That way I can include some information that I don't really get to include, elaborate on things, and maybe reach some people that I wouldn't normally read a 10-inch social media post. So, join me today as I dispel the rumors surrounding the historical St. Patrick and the Druids of Ireland. Sources, notes, images, and the shooting script are available on my website, powdermillpixie.com, if you want to follow along, fact check me, whatever it may be. So, let's go! Amongst all of the terrible, funny, informative St. Patrick's Day posts you may come across in the coming days, you may see some that discuss the historical St. Patrick's treatment of the Irish Druids. They may be kind of dumb ones, like this one showing the MCU's favorite witch, Agatha Wanky. Or maybe this kind of eye-catching image that usually appears attached to a scathing post regarding the treatment of St. Patrick towards the Druids. All of these claim that St. Patrick forcefully converted the Irish pagans and murdered Druids to the point of near extinction. Some neo-pagans all over the world firmly believe that St. Patrick committed full-scale war crimes against their spiritual ancestors, the Irish Druids. Their proof? Well, it's the legend of St. Patrick exorcising these snakes from the island of Ireland. Because Ireland hasn't had native snakes since at least the last ice age. Like the latest, that was the last time that there were snakes on Ireland. So obviously this story cannot be factual that St. Patrick cast the snakes out of Ireland, so therefore it must be allegory of some kind. And neo-pagans, especially frequently quoted author Isaac Bonewitz, has said that the serpents must represent the Irish Druids, because the Irish Druids would wear snake tattoos on their forearms. Isaac goes on to then compare celebrating St. Patrick's Day with the equivalent of celebrating Hitler or Stalin on a special day. I even found one Medium piece linked in a Facebook post that I saw from an account. The Medium article was from an account called Three Raccoons in a Spaceship. Then it offered further proof. The three raccoons say that St. Patrick was sent to Ireland by the Roman Catholic Pope to forcibly convert pagans and was a key figure in the church's campaign to eradicate the remaining European Druids. So, if this is true, if St. Patrick forcibly eradicated the ancient Druids from Ireland, how would somebody with such a brutal past become the patron saint of Ireland? Is the important to the country to this day, a country that embraces their pagan past in a lot of ways that other cultures don't. Well, this is because the historical St. Patrick had a much softer relationship with Ireland's pagans than the later Protestant Christians would like it to seem. You'll see that a lot of these stories about St. Patrick weren't written until hundreds of years after his death. And we'll also sit to see a little bit of St. Patrick's ministry and his own words. So, let's take this particular St. Patrick's Day to parse out some fact from fiction. To pop the bubble immediately, there is no evidence of any kind to support the story of a pagan genocide happening in Ireland. There is nothing in the written Irish histories. There is nothing in the oral Irish histories. Most importantly, there is nothing in archaeology that proves that there was a pagan genocide. So now that is out of the way, let's get into the specifics of debunking these particular myths. So I'm going to start off with most mentions of Christian holy men, St. Patrick, and later ones that are told of them violently clashing with the Irish pagans or Irish Druids come written centuries after the lives of these people. They come from what we call hagiographies, which are essentially biographies of the saints. Most of them amount to nothing more than post-dated religious fairy tales, more or less. Um, Druids are mentioned in Ireland for centuries after St. Patrick's supposed genocide of them. They are included in songs and law books and mentioned all the way up through the 1600s, where they were offering services as poets and historians and went by the term seer instead of druid, but the tradition remained the same all of this time. It is not something that was eradicated by St. Patrick alone or anybody else. The conversion of Ireland to Christianity went a lot smoother than it did other places. And it is true that there have been a lot of pagan religious sites, sacred sites, pagan sacred sites that have been desecrated over the years. I'm not going to deny any pagan that. There are sites that used to be sacred to pagans that now no longer exist, but they were either desecrated by medieval Protestants because they were kind of zealots when it came to religious idolatry, something that the prior Catholic Church, Roman Catholic Church, didn't really subscribe to in the same way that the later Protestants did. And other sacred sites were just built over, whether intentionally or unintentionally, over the thousands of years since the Druids walked, and we are here today. So I guess I should say the first Druids walked, and we are here today. So the historical pre-saint, St. Patrick, if one existed, and for the sake of this entire video, we are going to assume that one did. You would have been born in the 4th century in either Scotland or Wales. And it's a really interesting point in time to be in the English Isles area, because it is under Roman occupation, more or less. You see Roman forts and Roman soldiers, and there are a lot of Roman elements to this era in the English Isles or the British Isles. But there's also still a lot of, practicing pagans, practicing druids. There's even signs that Egyptian gods on top of the Roman gods were being worshipped, all in, these British Isles, this area that St. Patrick is going to be born into. And that even includes Christians. Yes, Christians existed in this area and in Ireland before St. Patrick was even born. So, St. Patrick's family themselves are Roman Christians. Whether they came from Italy to be Roman Christians or if they were Celtic Roman Christians, still, that was their faith. St. Patrick was raised with these, in the Roman Christian family until he turned 16. He was raised with the Roman Christian family until he was 16, which is when he was captured by the Irish during a raid and brought back to Ireland to work as a slave, tending after sheep and taking care of a farm. Patrick escaped his time from Ireland after about 3 to 6 years, depending on who's telling you the story, and he goes back to Wales or Scotland with the help of God, where Patrick then goes to maybe France to study under a bishop before returning back to Ireland as a missionary for kind of permanently in 432 CE, where he intends to minister and convert people to Christianity as much as he could, and he would remain there until his peaceful death in 460 CE. Now, despite Patrick being considered a Celtic Roman, he never spent any time in Italy, he never met a pope, and he definitely was not a Catholic, because the Catholic Church was not formed officially until 590 CE. There is a man sent by an early pope to Ireland named Palladius. He likely arrived in 430 CE, so just a little before Patrick's arrival. But they are two totally different people. I'm going to say that because I did mention the raccoons in a spacesuit Medium article saying that St. Patrick was involved in the Catholic Church's plan to forcefully convert pagans, which cannot be possible because, as I said just now. And there is also no documentation of him brutally wiping out Druids either. But I am not here to tell his life story today. I am talking about St. Patrick's because it's his day. There are two texts that we believe to be written by the historical St. Patrick. His confession, known as the Confessio, and a document called the Letters to the Soldiers of Coroticus, neither of which contain any mention of violence towards Ireland's Druids. St. Patrick, I should say at the time, he continually refers to his time with the pagans as a gift, saying that early Christians in Ireland, he saw a lot of similarities between the native Celtic beliefs and the Christians' own. Both had triple deities like the Irish Morrigan, which matched the belief of the Holy Trinity, one figure in three forms. And the Druids also had existing stories of warrior kings that were capable of minor miracles, like King David and Moses and all of these other figures. And so early on, a lot of people sought to convert pagans, in Ireland, I should say, sought to convert pagans by kind of showing them their existing folklore and myth and kind of tying it back to, a Christian god compared to their own pagan gods. I'm doing a bad job explaining this. I think a good way to show just how connected Irish paganism and Christianity is pointing to things like the fact that the traditional Irish cross is a symbol as a kind of amalgam of the Christian cross with the pagan Druid sunwheel behind it. There's also the fact that the Irish word for nun and a Druid priestess are the same, which I'm going to try here. It would be the Caltalk or Caltal. So here's another St. Patrick myth debunking moment. During St. Patrick's time in Ireland, it is said that he used the three-leaved shamrock as a visual example of the Christian Trinity. Three leaves, Father, Son, Holy Ghost. It is not something that he writes about himself ever using. It's not a comparison that, shows up in any of his writings. It's actually it's not in any of the hagiographies, even his, monk fan fiction. It doesn't mention them either. It actually shows up for the first time in a 1726 book published by botanist Caleb Threkeld. So it's kind of this side note in a botany book. Like, oh yeah, St. Patrick taught the Holy Trinity, the pagans, this way. Come on. Okay, but you have to sit still. Yes, I see. I'll sit here now. Anyway, I don't really want to dig too far into the religious weeds, but by the 7th century, St. Patrick now has his first hagiographies written about him, or like I said, those saint biographies that are essentially written by monk fanboys about their favorite, heroes, legends, saints, all of these. Anyway, St. Patrick's hagiographies contain stories, of the traditional miracles, his prayers preventing Christians from burning in fires, changing the weather to impress Druids, and like I said, yes, lots of little miracles that resulted in the mass deaths of Druid men and their priestesses becoming nuns for God. Those start at the 7th century. That is 300 years after St. Patrick lived. So, and these are really over the top kind of stories. It's not even until the 11th century that we actually get the first story of St. Patrick casting the snakes out of Ireland. And he's not even the only saint that gets credited for kicking snakes out of their region of the world. Monks were apparently not crazy on originality, and other saints like the French saint Honorius, also have stories about them casting the snakes out from their cities and regions. They are meant to, we think they were meant to mirror the Old Testament stories of Moses and his brother Aaron controlling the snakes of the Pharaoh's priests. It comes from Exodus. You can see it in The Prince of Egypt. 10 out of 10 recommend that movie. This is also the time period where we get those crazy stories about, British heroes like, St. George slaying the dragon, and, Joseph of Arimathea, the man that paid for the burial of Jesus, just coming by England to drop off the Holy Grail somewhere for Arthur and his men to find him. It all kind of comes from this same, monk mindset, I guess. They're all found in hagiographies. That's the madness of it. So when is a snake more than a snake? Both St. Patrick's personal writing and almost all of his hagiographies refer to the Druids as Druids. That's what they are. They do not use any allegory or additional symbolism to describe them. A Druid is a Druid is a Druid. So I think it would be really odd for them to suddenly start using allegory for just this snake story. According to a pagan author, Morgan Daimler, the earliest snake equals Druid connection that they could find came from a 1911 book called Fairy Faith in Celtic Country. And I went and I looked through this particular text that is available for free online. In it, the author, Evan Wentz, points out that a lake, Loch Derg, or the Red Lake, is both a Druid sacred site and a St. Patrick pilgrimage site. And Wentz is told two things by a local tour guide. One, that the island within this lake has a cave known as St. Patrick's Purgatory, which is, according to the local legend, St. Patrick's Purgatory is a real place on this island. You can go and visit it today. The myth that these locals carry with them is that this is where St. Patrick sent the snakes down into the earth, casting them out of Ireland. He sent them to Purgatory. The second thing that the local guide told Wentz was that it was believed locally that this area around the Red Lake was the last stronghold of the Druids of Ireland. This then leads the author Wentz to make this large mental leap, writing, quote, directly, "I think the old legend means that this is where St. Patrick ended his fight with the Druids, and that the serpents represent the Druids or paganism," end quote. I read the whole passage. That's a leap, even within the author's own, text. Rule number 1, research of any kind. Correlation does not equal causation. And that is especially true when you are mixing legend with history. Always double check. And before I get on to kind of the modern Druid-St. Patrick relationship and its importance to the Irish people as a whole, I want to address one more claim that I kept seeing pop up on some of those anti-St. Patrick's Day posts. That St. Patrick burned 180 Druidic texts. This story first pops up in a 13th century book called the Book of Lichen, which was 13th century. That is almost 1,000 years after the historical St. Patrick would have lived. It is this story about him burning the Druidic texts is not mentioned any time before this, even in some of the wildest, of the 7th and 8th century hagiographies. So even though it's not mentioned anymore, it was a little bit hard for me to disprove this one, even though I know that it was not true. So here's the thing. Here's where we kind of split some Druidic hairs. Yes, some Druids did keep physical records in a language only they knew. And there were cases of these texts being burned or destroyed either by Roman Christians or Roman pagans. But for this, with St. Patrick, we are talking specifically about the Irish Druids. And the Irish Druids did not have a writing system of their own until the 4th century CE. So about the same time Patrick arrived there. This is when the Gaelic Druid language of Ockham reaches the country of Ireland. There's a little bit more fudgy in there, but for the sake of this, we are looking at the Germanic Gaelic Druid language slowly making its way over to Ireland. Ireland did not have its own native Druidic writing system. It came along much later. Anyway. And the Irish Druids used this language, the Ogham language, to transcribe their calendar system, which was perfected through thousands of years of watching the skies. Today we call it the Irish zodiac, where each month corresponds to a specific sacred tree with an animal and a precious stone tied to it as well. The Irish Druids carved this knowledge into stone alongside other important names and dates using this language. So they really didn't have the kind of text that could be burned. Things were etched into stone. And even if they did have some sort of flammable records, the odds of them making 180 documents in the time of them, coming into contact with this language to St. Patrick's ministry, where they would have all been, burned, it doesn't make much sense. But when it comes to St. Patrick, more important than the stories of the snakes and the Druids, Patrick is as I said a million times, he's the patron saint of Ireland. He is seen as a protector of his people. And even though he wasn't really Irish, he felt that way. I think my favorite thing that I read that kind of shows the importance of St. Patrick to people is a 19th century story about a deal St. Patrick made with God for the people of Ireland. The story goes that Patrick had been fasting in the woods for so long that he was on the verge of death, and God, not wanting to lose his greatest messenger, begged Patrick to eat something, and St. Patrick agreed under 3 conditions. 1, that the Irish would not live under permanent oppression for their lives, for the remainder of their time on this earth. 2, that the country would be submerged beneath the sea 6 years before the apocalypse, sparing the inhabitants of Ireland the worst of what's to come. And 3, that St. Patrick himself would be the one to judge the hearts of the Irish when the time came. That is a very specific set of promises between a saint and their God on behalf of the people. That's what St. Patrick is. He's a symbol of Irish strength. Through their centuries of oppression, where they were forbidden from using their own language, not even the Druidic language, Irish language was banned for such a long time. They were treated as Europe's punching bags, near starving to death through potato famines, cast out of American society for long periods of time and not, being employable in America. The Irish have been through a lot, and St. Patrick was there for them the entire time. So, to me, more important than pagan myth is the Irish people's reality. And a lot of Irish pagans today include St. Patrick in their practices because he's important to Irish culturally. Anyway, that is my thing. Thank you for listening and watching my annual St. Patrick's versus the Druids versus reality debunking rant. I hope you learned something. If you did, I hope you share this podcast with one of your friends that you've seen sharing those kind of posts. And yeah, if you're watching it on YouTube, give me a little like there. Share me wherever you are. If you want to try to prove me wrong, like I said, all of my research is credited on my website, paranormalpixie.com. So check my sources, and my comment section is always open for debate. I had a really fun time doing this. I have written it, recorded it, and edited this whole episode in less than 48 hours when I got the idea for it. Thank you to my partner Dorian for helping me set all of this up so that I can get it all done. I will be back soon. Until then, have fun. Paranormal Pixie out. Bye.
Say hello. Say hello. You were here. You want to say hello? No, it's right there. It's right there. Say hello. Hello, camera. Hello. Hello. Okay. Go down.